In the 2018 Wisconsin state elections, the Democrats won 53% of the vote for the state assembly, compared to 44.8% for their Republican opponents. As part of a blue wave sweeping across the country, they improved their vote percentage by 7.5%. Now, with such a margin of victory in the popular vote, you would expect the Democrats to have a majority of the seats, or at least make significant gains from their total of 35 out of 99 seats in the previous election. They did not. In fact, they only gained one seat, leaving the Republicans with a strong majority of 63 seats. When you see a party that has less than 45% of the vote gain almost 2/3 of the power, you know that something is wrong. The game is clearly rigged. The case of Wisconsin shows how gerrymandering, a practice where politicians draw districts to consolidate their power, can completely upend democracy, giving almost unassailable power to an entrenched and often corrupt minority. In effect, representatives are choosing their voters and not, as it should be, the other way around. In this episode, we will talk about how the US can finally slay the gerrymander. Before we talk about how we can end gerrymandering, let's do a quick history lesson to see how things got so bad. Gerrymandering has existed since the founding of the United States, when the founding fathers decided to give the power of setting district boundaries to state legislators. The founders were charting new territory in their effort to establish, by deliberate design, representative government. But this decision had the practical effect of letting the foxes run the chicken coop. Soon enough, there was a politician named Elbridge Gerry who, in order to help his party gain an advantage, drew a district in the shape of a salamander, hence the term gerrymander. The situation with gerrymandering improved up until 1929, when Congress required districts to be contiguous and compact territory, and containing, as nearly as practicable, an equal number of inhabitants. However, gerrymandering has progressively worsened since the Reapportionment Act of 1929, which inadvertently threw out most of these requirements. In recent years, the practice has been further refined as a tool for distorting elections by systematically applying Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, and advanced data analytics. After the 2010 elections, Republicans used their redistricting powers to consolidate their dominance through surgically precise gerrymanders. Gerrymandering has gotten worse, but why is it such a big problem in the first place? Examining from first principles will show us why gerrymandering needs to be seen as a fundamental problem that leads to further distortions of democracy. Recall from the first episode of our series that for a democracy to serve its people well, it needs to represent the will of the people, serve all people, and actually serve. Gerrymandering is a serious and fundamental problem in that it affects all three. With gerrymandering, the system can produce results that no longer represent the will of the people. A party can gain a significant majority of seats with only a minority of the votes. Yes, some unevenness is to be expected due to demographics and geography in any system that uses districts. However, when you look at egregious examples like Wisconsin, anyone can tell you that it is just plain wrong. Gerrymandering also stops the government from serving all people. In fact, the government becomes self-serving, with representatives choosing their voters, allowing them to entrench their power through line drawing instead of implementing policies people actually want. Finally, gerrymandering may undermine the functioning of democracy by making district elections less competitive. 538 has an incisive analysis that shows how different districting rules would likely affect congressional elections. The severely gerrymandered options are the ones with the fewest competitive districts. There is also evidence that the effect is far worse than what is just shown with demographic data. When a party thinks that it doesn't have a chance in an election, it is unlikely it will attract strong candidates or political donations. This makes the election race even less competitive. There is also the possibility that gerrymandering has led to increased polarization and divisiveness, as parties can win without needing to field candidates who can appeal to the broad middle of the political spectrum. Having fewer moderate politicians means less compromise and fewer bills getting passed. Or at least that's how the theory goes. We'll get back to this later. So how can we slay the gerrymander? First, we need to recognize that gerrymandering is not some kind of unavoidable evil. Many countries with healthy democracies around the world do not have this problem. Many of these, for example, use a system of proportional representation, where seats are filled based on the percentage of the vote each party attains. Switching to proportional representation would end gerrymandering, but at the cost of ending local representation. This would be such a big political and cultural shift that I don't think it should be considered as part of this democracy rescue package. Another possibility for ending gerrymandering would be to have the practice outlawed by the Supreme Court. This was the route many democracy activists were pinning their hopes on. The Voting Rights Act made gerrymandering done on the basis of race against the law. Perhaps the same could be done for partisan gerrymandering. The Supreme Court even said they might consider acting on partisan gerrymandering cases if an objective way of measuring it was developed. Activists did, and still nothing. Recent cases such as Whitford versus Gill show that even though the Supreme Court largely recognizes that partisan gerrymandering is a huge problem, it still views it as constitutional and is therefore reluctant to do anything about it. It appears that the only way to eliminate gerrymandering is through legislation passed by Congress. So what solution should Congress adopt? The solution to gerrymandering is quite simple. Take the politics out of it. This is what the UK, Canada, and Australia, and other democracies around the world with representation by district do. They let independent electoral commissions handle redistricting, and they are drawn logically according to political and geographic boundaries. Gerrymandering is simply not an issue in these countries. In fact, it doesn't even exist in the lexicon. Independent electoral commissions are composed of members from a variety of political backgrounds. Importantly, these members are civilians, not politicians, whether current, former, or future. There are usually provisions to ensure that a substantial number of members are independents and that maps can only be approved if a majority of members from all political affiliations approve them. If we go back to 538's analysis, we see that if independent electoral commissions were implemented across the United States, they would not only make elections fairer, they would also likely be more competitive. We see that by drawing districts according to logical boundaries, the number of competitive districts would jump from 72 to 99. Some progress has been made with implementing independent redistricting commissions throughout the US. Some states in recent years, such as California and Michigan, have mandated independent redistricting commissions through referenda. The problem is that leaving it to referenda to reform redistricting is slow and piecemeal. In addition, some states like Wisconsin don't allow citizen-led ballot measures, meaning that it is impossible for this reform to ever be implemented at the state level. Even with recent progress, there are currently only 6 states that use independent commissions for drawing congressional districts, and 8 for state districts. For the other 42 states, the process is still very political. The only real way to make any real progress with independent redistricting would be to mandate it federally. As we showed in the last episode, states conduct elections, but Congress is allowed to impose regulation. This is what H.R. 1, the bill before Congress that we mentioned in the last video, aims to do, by forcing states to use independent redistricting commissions and by making partisan gerrymandering illegal. It would basically end gerrymandering as we know it. However, we're not done yet. H.R. 1 would, unfortunately, do nothing to prevent gerrymandering for state elections, since that lies outside the jurisdiction of Congress. Those rigged elections in Wisconsin would still happen, unfortunately. However, having independent electoral commissions at the federal level could set a precedent for it to spread at the state level. This is, after all, what happened after senators started being elected at the federal level. The practice spread to the states. It's also important to remember that while the practice of gerrymandering has to end, like it has for every other functioning democracy, ending it is not a panacea. Gerrymandering has been used as a scapegoat to explain polarization and gridlock in Congress. While there is evidence that it may indirectly contribute to both, the best evidence shows the effect of gerrymandering lies at the margins. Much more work needs to be done to fix American democracy than simply ending gerrymandering. In the next episode, we will target the issue of polarization and a possible solution, ranked choice voting. Hi everyone, thank you for watching this episode in our series on fixing American democracy. Please check out the previous episodes of the series if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments what you think about these policies and how you would fix American democracy. Finally, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you'd like to watch more content that looks at problems in the world and how we can solve them, consider subscribing or supporting me on Patreon.